The ledger lay open on the plantation desk, its spine bowed, its paper soft with years of damp Louisiana air. The lantern light trembled across the ink like something alive. It wasn't the neat rows of sugar yields or the cold arithmetic of sales that made the overseer's fingers tighten around the brass handle. It was a column he'd been ordered to keep apart from the rest. A thin, quiet strip of numbers and names that did not belong among the ordinary records. A column meant to be glanced at only when the door was shut, when the windows were latched, when even the walls felt as though they might listen. It tracked something no one wanted to name, yet everyone had begun to recognize. 7 years of entries now, and each year made the previous one feel less like an accident. Blue eyes, blonde hair, skin pale as candle wax, darkening only slightly as the children grew. All born to enslaved women across 3 parishes in Louisiana. Different mothers, different cabins, different men listed as fathers. Men whose faces and features could not possibly explain what was written in the infants' bodies. Children who looked nothing like their mothers. Nothing like the men recorded in the books. Nothing like anyone in the quarters. And so the whispers started. They always did. They moved from plantation to plantation along the Mississippi River, carried by traders who stopped at every landing, by runaways who risked everything to pass a warning, by house servants who had learned how to hear without being seen. Midwives spoke of it in the softest voices, as if the wrong syllable might summon something back into the room. They had delivered these strange babies and felt their blood turn to ice, because the truth was as simple as it was impossible to say aloud. Someone was fathering them. Someone who moved unseen. Someone who left no footprint, but the proof pressed into the faces of children who should not exist. Before we go any further into Louisiana's most disturbing secret, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss stories like this. And tell me where you're listening from. What city or state is holding you tonight? Now, let's uncover what really happened in those Louisiana parishes between 1837 and 1844. The mystery would consume 7 years, splinter families, end lives, and reveal a truth so calculated, so quietly cruel, that even men hardened by the daily violence of plantation life would struggle to look it in the eye. But in 1837, when the first of these children was born, no one yet understood what they were seeing. What began as a single anomaly would become a pattern, and patterns meant intention. It would shake the foundations of Louisiana's plantation society, expose the darkest rooms inside a system built on bondage, and reveal how power could be used with absolute impunity when the law itself was designed to shelter the powerful. Louisiana in the late 1830s was a place of dazzling contradictions. New Orleans thrived as one of America's richest cities, its port swallowing and spitting out sugar, cotton, and enslaved people by the thousands. French and Spanish colonial influence still clung to everything. The iron balconies, the courtyards, the language rolling through the streets. Creole French braided with English, Spanish, and African tongues into a sound that belonged to nowhere else on earth. Theaters hosted opera and ballet. Restaurants served meals that pretended they were still in Paris. Ballrooms shimmered under chandeliers shipped from Europe, and men and women laughed as if the world beyond the gaslights did not exist. But it did exist. Beyond the manicured gardens and elegant facades, the plantation economy ruled with a kind of absolute authority. Quiet, total, and unquestioned. North of New Orleans, the parishes of St. James, St. John the Baptist, and Ascension formed the heart of sugar country. These were not the vast cotton empires of Mississippi or Alabama, where enslaved people worked in relative isolation across endless fields. Sugar was different. Sugar required timing, precision, and a brutality that came not only from whips and guns, but from the clock itself. The cane had to be cut and processed within a narrow window before the first frost could ruin the crop. From October through December, the grinding season, every plantation became a factory that never slept. The sugar houses ran day and night, the air thick with steam and smoke, and the sweet, nauseating smell of boiling juice. Enslaved people worked in shifts that stretched 18, 20, sometimes 22 hours. They cut cane under the thin November sun, hauled stalks to the mills, fed them into grinding rollers that could seize cloth, hair, flesh, pulling a person in before anyone could even shout. They stirred kettles the size of bathtubs where the liquid bubbled like molten glass, and a single splash could strip skin down to bone. Exhaustion turned hands clumsy. Clumsy hands became accidents. Accidents became deaths. And those deaths were recorded like broken tools, a loss of property, a calculation against the profit margin of the harvest. The mortality rate on Louisiana sugar plantations was the highest in the American South. Owners knew it. They factored it into their business plans, the way one might factor in the wear on a millstone. It was cheaper to work people into the ground and purchase replacements than to sustain them. This was the world into which those strange children would be born. A world where human beings were reduced to output, where bodies were not owned by the souls inside them, and where the law offered no shield, no recourse, no language even for what could be done to them. And unlike other plantation regions, these parishes were close, densely packed along the river like teeth in a jaw. Property lines were sometimes nothing more than cypress trees and bayou water. The Mississippi was the highway, the lifeline, the artery carrying mail, passengers, goods, and rumor. A birth on one plantation could be known on 3 others by morning. A punishment, a sale, a death, news traveled fast, because an invisible network existed beneath the surface of plantation society, and it did not belong to the masters. So when the unusual births began, they did not happen in isolation. They echoed. The first plantation to record such a birth was Bellamont, a mid-sized sugar operation owned by the Duchamp family, who had held the land since the Spanish colonial period. The main house rose in Creole style, lifted on brick pillars against flooding, wide galleries wrapping around both floors. Moss hung from the oaks along the drive from the river road like a funeral veil. Behind the house sprawled the works, the mill building, boiling house, curing sheds, the cooper where barrels were made. And farther back, beyond a screen of trees meant to hide the truth from visitors, sat the quarters. 2 rows of cabins facing each other across a dirt path. Each cabin held multiple families, sometimes 10, sometimes 12 people in a single room. No privacy, no softness, just breath and sweat and the thin, stubborn refusal to die. The Duchamps were Monsieur Philippe Duchamp, his wife Celeste, and their 3 children. In 1837, Philippe was 48, thin, nervous, a man who had inherited wealth and lived in terror of losing it. He worried about crop yields, sugar prices, Cuban competition, the loans he'd taken to expand his operation. He worried about rebellion and abolitionists, about politics shifting beneath his feet. He worried because his comfort rested on an unstable, violent foundation, and somewhere in him he knew it. His overseer, Vincent Habert, was 32 and had been at Bellamont for 6 years. Habert was unusual. He could read and write fluently in French and English. He kept meticulous records. He was known for being firm without indulging in pointless cruelty, organizing labor, maximizing output through structure rather than terror. This made him valuable to Duchamp, who lacked the appetite for the everyday savagery other owners considered necessary. Hebert lived in a small house positioned between the main residence and the quarters, as if he were a lock placed between two worlds. He rose before dawn, made his rounds, assigned work, tracked progress, recorded everything. He knew every enslaved person by name, their skills, their weaknesses, their family ties. And Hebert understood what that knowledge meant. It was power. He wielded it carefully. It was Hebert who first noticed the anomaly in March of 1837. And it was Hebert who would spend the next 7 years trying to understand what it meant. The child was born just before dawn on March 14, 1837. An elderly enslaved midwife named Josephine delivered her. Josephine, who had guided more than 200 infants into the world over a lifetime of nights like this. She had been born in Saint-Domingue before revolution turned it into Haiti. She had been brought to Louisiana young and survived everything. The change from French to American rule, the sale from one owner to another, the deaths of her own children, the grinding labor that swallowed years whole. She had seen breech births, stillbirths, mothers who bled out on cabin floors, babies born too early to cling to breath, twins tangled together, fevers that rose like tides and took who they pleased. She had learned to keep her face neutral, to show no emotion, to do the work and move on. But when she cleaned the newborn girl and saw her in the lamplight, something cold moved through her chest. Fear, genuine fear. The mother was Marie, dark-skinned, strong, 23 years old, born on Bellemont. She had known no other life. Her own mother had died in the sugar house when Marie was 12. Caught by the grinding mill, her scream cut short as the rollers pulled her in. Marie had been 10 feet away, frozen, forced to watch, learning early what this place did to bodies. After that, she became quiet. She spoke only when necessary, eyes lowered, working without complaint. Hebert had paired her at 18 with a man named Thomas, a pairing arranged to produce children who would become plantation property. Thomas was a field hand, strong, reliable, 25. They shared a corner of a cabin with 3 other families. Marie had already had one child, a boy named Jack, now 4. Jack looked like his parents. Dark skin, dark eyes, tightly coiled hair. Healthy, bright, already being trained toward the fields. This second child should have looked the same. Every expectation, every observation, every crude certainty men like Hebert and Duchamp believed they understood about inheritance. But when Josephine wiped away the birth fluids and lifted the infant toward the lamp, the cabin seemed to tilt. Pale skin, hair so blonde it was almost white, eyes the color of a clear winter sky. Josephine wrapped the child quickly, as if cloth could hide the impossible. Her mind reached for old stories, passed down from older midwives, from older worlds. They spoke of distant ancestry resurfacing, hidden traits, long-buried mixtures. Sometimes a child might be born slightly lighter, with a different curl pattern, an unexpected shade. But this was not a variation. This was a rupture. The baby looked as though she'd been born to a Swedish immigrant, not to Marie. Narrow nose, thin lips, bone structure that did not belong in this cabin, in this heat, in this life. When Marie saw her daughter, she didn't speak. She stared, exhaustion drained away and replaced by something else. Recognition, resignation, something too old for her young face. Her hands trembled as she took the baby, and Josephine saw tears slip down her cheeks. "Does she look like anyone you know?" Josephine asked softly. Marie's silence was an answer that weighed more than words. Thomas arrived an hour later, coming off a night shift in the fields. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the child. His face emptied, as if someone had reached inside him and pulled something out. "That's not mine," he said, flat and final. "She is yours," Marie whispered. "She is." Thomas stepped closer, eyes fixed on the baby like she was a wound. "Look at her," he said, voice rising. "Look at her and tell me that's my child. Marie, please, who was it? Who did you—" "No one," Marie said, breaking. "I swear. No one. I don't understand. I don't understand." Josephine moved between them. "This happens sometimes," she said, even as her own bones told her it did not. "Old blood coming through. Ancestors from long ago." Thomas stared at the infant, then at Marie, then at Josephine, and without another word, he turned and walked out into the morning. By midday, everyone on Bellemont knew. The news moved through the quarters like flame through dry cane. People crowded the cabin to see for themselves, staring at the impossible child. Some muttered about curses, about spirits, about God's punishment. Others said nothing at all, their faces troubled in a way that suggested they understood something they could not speak. By evening, the story had crossed property lines, carried by relatives on neighboring plantations, by traders, by that silent, relentless network beneath plantation life. And by the end of the week, Vincent Hebert was summoned to the main house. He walked up the oak-lined drive with dread settling into his gut. He had questioned Marie gently at first, then with growing pressure. She insisted she had been with no one but Thomas. She swore it through tears, even as she held her pale, strange-looking daughter. He questioned Thomas, who refused the child and requested reassignment. He questioned the others in the cabin. No one offered anything, either because they knew nothing or because they knew too much. Duchamp paced his study when Hebert entered. Pipe tobacco and old paper filled the air. A portrait of Duchamp's father watched from above the fireplace, stern and unblinking. "Sit down, Hebert," Duchamp said. "Tell me what happened." Hebert laid out the facts as he knew them. The birth, the child's appearance, Marie's insistence, no evidence of anyone else. "It's not possible," Duchamp muttered, pacing again. "Thomas is the father. It's in the records. I have the breeding records right here." He pulled out a ledger, flipping pages with shaking hands. Marie and Thomas paired in 1832. First child in 1833. This is the second. Thomas is the father. "Yes, sir," Habert said carefully. "That's what the records show. But the child—" "I don't care what the child looks like," Duchamp snapped, voice sharp with fear. "There's an explanation. There must be. Mixed ancestry, distant blood. These things happen." "Sir," Hebert said, quieter now, "I've seen mixed ancestry. This is different. This child looks completely European." Duchamp stopped pacing. He stared at him as if Hebert had spoken blasphemy. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything, sir. I'm reporting what I've observed, and I'm asking what you want me to do." Because if Hebert was suggesting that someone, one of them, had, Duchamp couldn't finish the thought. Some implications were too dangerous to say aloud. Duchamp sank into his chair, suddenly looking older. "Record the birth," he said. "Note the unusual appearance. But the father of record remains Thomas. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." "And Hebert," Duchamp added, voice lowered. "I don't want this discussed. Not with other overseers, not with anyone. It's a private matter, an anomaly, nothing more. Habert left the main house with his mind turning like the mill rollers. He understood Duchamp's fear. A white man fathering a child with an enslaved woman would be scandalous, yes, but not unheard of. The deeper danger was Marie's insistence, her insistence that she had been with no one else. If the child was not Thomas's, then something had been done to Marie without consent. And if that was true, it meant someone had access to the quarters, to the women, without oversight, without consequence. That night, Habert opened a personal journal separate from the plantation ledgers. He wrote down everything: Marie's testimony, the infant's features, the date, March 14th, 1837. He wrote as though ink could hold the truth in place. He had no way of knowing this would be the first of many entries. The child was named Claire. Marie tried to care for her, tried to love her, but Claire was a living reminder of something Marie could not explain and could not escape. Thomas never acknowledged her. He avoided Marie, avoided the cabin, avoided even looking at the child when their paths crossed. The quarters divided in quiet, complicated ways. Some pitied Marie, understanding that something terrible had happened. Others judged her, believing she must have done something, must have invited it. A few looked at Claire with fear, sensing that her very existence meant danger. And Claire grew, healthy, bright, unmistakable. Her blonde hair thickened. Her blue eyes stayed startling. Her pale skin burned under the Louisiana sun. By 6 months old, she looked like a Nordic child placed in the quarters, as if by a cruel, deliberate hand. And then, 14 months after Claire's birth, 14 months after Claire's birth, it happened again. The second child was born on a plantation called Riverside, 6 miles upriver from Bellemont. Riverside was larger, more cane, more hands, more profit, and more pressure to keep the machine running without interruption. The owner was Etienne Broussard, 55, second-generation sugar planter, a man whose wealth had been refined the way sugar was, through heat, force, and time. Broussard was known for productivity and for temper. He believed discipline lived in pain, and that fear was the only language enslaved people truly understood. His overseer, Gideon Frost, shared that belief. 40 years old, Virginia-born, broad-shouldered, sun-weathered, with a whip coiled at his belt like an extension of his arm. The people at Riverside feared him. Frost considered that fear a sign of good management. The mother was a young woman named Deline, 20, who worked in the main house as a laundress. She had been chosen for the role because she had learned the most dangerous skill a house servant could possess: invisibility. To be present without being acknowledged, to hear without appearing to listen, to move through rooms like a shadow and never make the mistake of seeming human. Deline had been born in the Natchez district and sold to Riverside at 15. The sale had split her from her mother and 2 younger siblings. She never saw them again. The absence carved something hollow inside her, and she filled that hollow with routine. Work, silence, the small mercies of a meal that wasn't stolen, a day without bruises, a night without screams. She'd been paired with a field hand named Samuel, 22, strong and quiet. Their bond was cordial, not close. 2 people forced into the shape of a family by someone else's decision, trying to survive without hope of choice. When Deline realized she was pregnant, the fear came first. Pregnancy was vulnerability, pain, the possibility of dying on a cabin floor and being replaced without ceremony. But behind the fear, something fragile stirred. an idea that a child might be hers, if only for a little while. Someone to love, someone that belonged to her until the plantation claimed that child too. The pregnancy progressed normally. She kept working, hauling water, scrubbing clothes, wringing fabric until her wrists ached, hanging sheets in humid air that never truly dried. As her belly grew, the labor became heavier. She didn't complain. Complaining was another word for punishment. She gave birth in May of 1838. The labor dragged through the night and into the next day. The plantation midwife, a woman named Ruth, worked in silence, doing what she could with what she had. When the baby finally came, a boy, healthy, loud with life, Ruth cleaned him quickly. Then she stopped. Her hands froze, her face blanched, as if she'd looked at something that did not belong in this world. "What is it?" Deline asked, exhausted, reaching for her son. "What's wrong?" Ruth didn't answer. She placed the baby in Deline's arms and stepped back, eyes troubled. Deline looked down. Blonde hair, blue eyes, skin so pale it seemed almost translucent. For a moment she couldn't breathe. It felt like the cabin had lost its air, like the walls had shifted closer. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't." "Who's the father?" Ruth asked softly. "Samuel," Deline said immediately, as if the word could anchor reality. "Samuel is the father. I haven't been with anyone else. I swear it." "Then how do you explain this child?" "I can't," Deline sobbed. "I can't explain it." Samuel was brought in from the fields to see his son. His reaction came quick and clean, like a blade. He stared at the baby, then at Deline, and his face hardened. "You've been with someone," he said, voice flat. "I haven't," Deline pleaded. "I swear. Don't lie to me. Look at him. That's not my child." "He is," Deline whispered, breaking under the weight of it. "He has to be. I haven't been with anyone else." "Then who?" Samuel demanded. "Who did this?" "I don't know," Deline cried. "I don't know." Samuel turned away and walked out. He requested reassignment, a different crew, a different cabin. He never acknowledged the boy again. Gideon Frost heard within hours. He pushed into the cabin where Deline lay recovering and stared at the infant with a mixture of shock and anger that felt almost personal. "Who's the father?" he demanded. "Samuel," Deline whispered. Frost's eyes narrowed. "That's not Samuel's child. Look at it." "I haven't been with anyone else." "You're lying." "I'm not," she said, voice cracking. "I swear on my life." Frost questioned her for an hour. His voice grew sharper, his threats more explicit. But Deline's answer never changed. No one but Samuel. No explanation. No understanding. At last, Frost reported it to Broussard. Broussard's response was fury, not at the violation that must have occurred, but at the breach in the illusion of control. He accused Frost of failing to keep order, of allowing movement, of letting something slip through the cracks. Frost insisted his operation was tight, that no outsider could access the quarters without being noticed. The argument went nowhere. In the end, Broussard ordered the birth recorded with Samuel as the father of record, despite the obvious impossibility. The matter was to be closed, not discussed, forgotten. The baby was named Jean, and like Claire before him, he became a living contradiction, a child whose existence turned whispers into something colder. When news of Jean's birth reached Bellemont, Vincent Hebert felt certainty settle in his chest like a stone. This was not coincidence, not a strange quirk of ancestry surfacing at random, not twice, not like this. He opened his journal and made a new entry careful and precise. The date, the plantation, the mother's name, the circumstances. Then he placed it beside his notes on Claire and stared at the two entries until patterns began to show through the ink. Both mothers had been working in or near the main houses in the months before conception. Marie, though a field hand, had been pulled into extra cleaning when Bellamont's house staff was short. Deline worked in the laundry and had been assigned additional duties: late cleaning, night work, preparing rooms after the family retired. The connection was thin, but it was there. And thin connections were how truths began to reveal themselves. Hébert began asking questions the way a careful man asks questions when the wrong answer could get him killed. He spoke to traders who moved between plantations, asking casually about births, about gossip, about anything unusual. He listened to enslaved people with relatives on other properties, not prying so much as letting words drift toward him. He took note of dates, of movements, of who had been where and when. And then he waited. Because if the pattern was real, it would not end with two. He was right. Over the next 2 years, 3 more children were born with the same impossible features. Each birth followed the same shape, like a wound repeating itself. A dark-featured mother, a dark-featured partner listed in the records, a child whose face denied both of them, a mother insisting she had been with no one else, a partner refusing the child, a household ordering silence. The third child was born at Oakmont in November of 1838. The mother, Isabel, 25, worked in the main house as a cook's assistant. The baby was a girl, blonde hair, blue eyes. Isabel insisted she'd been with no one but Gabriel, her partner. No one believed her. No one could prove otherwise. The fourth child came at St. Clair in March of 1839. The mother, Thérèse, 19, had been brought up from the quarters to serve at a dinner party 2 months before conception began. The baby was a boy with the same striking features. Thérèse's partner, Antoine, refused to acknowledge him. The fifth child was born at Magnolia Grove in September of 1839. The mother, Pauline, 22, worked in the laundry and had been called to the main house for cleaning when regular staff was occupied. Her baby was a girl, pale and bright-eyed. Pauline's partner, Louis, left her after the birth. Hébert documented each one: dates, names, work assignments. He drew a map marking every plantation where it happened, spread across 3 parishes, yet all within a 15-mile radius along the Mississippi River. And then, slowly, something else emerged. Something that took months to see because it lived in the background. A name. Never prominent. Never recorded in the same bold strokes as the owners, but always present in the margins of time and place. Dr. Marcus Levine. Levine was a physician, 42, unmarried, respected across the parishes. Born in Louisiana to a French father and a Creole mother. Sent to Paris at 18 to study medicine, returned in 1825 with 8 years of training and an easy confidence that made planters trust him. He was known for skill with fevers and infections that flourished in the humid climate. Known for discretion, for treating delicate matters without gossip, for keeping secrets, which was a currency more valuable than sugar to families who lived on reputation. Levine served several plantations as their primary doctor, traveling between them as needed. He treated the planter families for their ailments and treated enslaved people when their value justified the expense. A skilled worker with a broken bone, a pregnant woman whose child meant future property, a house servant trained too carefully to be discarded. And Levine himself was distinctive, tall and thin, pale blonde hair worn slightly longer than fashion allowed. blue eyes that held a strange steadiness, as if they were measuring you. He dressed in dark suits, well-made, never ostentatious, moving with deliberate grace, speaking softly, never raising his voice, always perfectly controlled. Hebert had met him before at Bellemont. The doctor had been called for Madame Duchamp's fever, for a broken arm, for minor ailments. Professional, competent, and oddly cold. There was something in Levine's presence that left Hebert uneasy, though he could never name it. Now, reviewing his notes, Hebert found the pattern that made his stomach turn. Levine had been present at or near each plantation in the crucial months before the pregnancies began. Bellemont, a social gathering in December 1836, 3 months before Marie conceived. Riverside, called in February 1838 to treat Madame Broussard's respiratory infection, 3 months before Deline conceived. Oakmont, delivered a baby for the owner's wife in August 1838, 3 months before Isabelle conceived. St. Clair, examined an injured worker in December 1838, 3 months before Thérèse conceived. Magnolia Grove, attended a dinner party in June 1839, 3 months before Pauline conceived. Always there, always just close enough, always with access. Hebert's hands shook as he checked the dates again. He cross-referenced visits, traced movements, tried to find a flaw in his own reasoning. But the pattern held with a precision that felt deliberate. Suspicion was one thing. Proof was another. He had no witnesses, no confession. Only a sequence of coincidences so exact, they stopped feeling like coincidences at all. So he turned toward the only people who could truly know. The women. If Levine was responsible, they would know. They might not speak it. They might not survive speaking it. But they would know. Hebert began with Marie because she was on his plantation. He found her in the fields one afternoon, working with a hoe, Claire strapped to her back in a cloth sling. Claire was 2 now, her blonde hair bright under the sun like something that should never have been there. "Marie," Hebert said quietly, stepping close enough that others wouldn't hear. "I need to speak with you." Marie looked up, guarded. "Yes, sir." "About Claire," he said. "About her father." Marie's face closed like a door. "Thomas is her father, sir. That's what the records say." "Marie," Hebert said, voice low. "I know that's not true, and I think you know it too." "I don't know what you mean, sir." "I think someone hurt you," Hebert pressed carefully, as if even the air could betray him. "Someone you couldn't refuse, someone with power." Marie was silent for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Even if that were true, sir, what difference would it make?" She looked back down at the soil as if it held the only honest answer. "I'm property," she said. "Property can't be hurt. Property can't refuse. Property has no rights." Hebert felt his throat tighten. "Marie." "I have nothing more to say, sir," she cut in, voice steady with something that sounded like practiced survival. "Thomas is Claire's father. That's what the records show." And she turned back to her work. Hebert understood then that the wall she'd built around the truth was not made of stubbornness. It was made of fear. And he would find the same wall again and again. He traveled on pretexts, finding brief chances to speak with Deline, with Isabelle, with Thérèse, with Pauline. Each conversation followed the same grim path. Each woman insisted she'd been with no one but the man in the records. Each woman offered nothing more. Not because they didn't know, but because they did. Hebert returned to Bellemont with a sickness in his chest that had nothing to do with fever. He had traced the pattern. He had found the shadow at the edge of every doorway, and now he had to decide what to do with a truth that the law itself would refuse to hear. He decided he needed someone with authority, someone who might actually act. So he chose Judge Armand Thibault of St. James Parish. And in the humid summer of 1840, he went to the courthouse carrying a map, a timeline, and 7 years' worth of dread. He didn't yet understand what the judge would force him to see, that even if he was right, even if everyone in that room believed him, there might still be nothing at all, the law would call a crime. The meeting with Judge Armand Thibault took place on a suffocating afternoon in July of 1840. The courthouse sat at the center of the parish seat, a modest town that existed solely to serve the surrounding plantations. Inside Thibault's office, the air was thick with humidity and paper. Law books lined the shelves, their spines cracked from years of use. Loose documents covered every surface, evidence of a man who still believed the law mattered. Thibault was 60 years old, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, with eyes that missed very little. He had earned a reputation for fairness, at least within the narrow boundaries the system allowed. When Vincent Hebert laid out his evidence, the judge listened without interruption. The map came first, then the dates, then the list of births, the mothers' names, the work assignments, the timelines of Dr. Levine's visits. Hebert spoke carefully, slowly, knowing every word carried weight. When he finished, Thibault leaned back in his chair and said nothing for a long time. "This is a serious accusation," he said at last. "I know," Hebert replied. "That's why I brought it to you." "Do you have direct evidence? Testimony from the women?" "No, sir. They won't speak. Or can't." Thibault rose and walked to the window, looking down at the street below. Wagons creaking past, men going about their business as if nothing in the world were wrong. "You understand what you're suggesting," he said without turning. "Dr. Levine is respected. His family is old. To accuse him without proof would destroy him." "The children exist," Hebert said. "The pattern exists. Patterns can be coincidence." 5 times, Hebert replied. "Across 5 plantations, all within 2 years, all tied to one man." Thibault turned back slowly. "Even if you're right," he said, "what law has he broken?" The question hung between them. Hebert understood what the judge was saying without him needing to finish it. Even if the women testified, even if their voices were allowed to speak, the law did not recognize enslaved women as persons. There was no crime for what had been done to them, none that mattered. "So there's nothing to be done," Hebert said. "I didn't say that," Thibault replied. "I'll make discreet inquiries, speak to the owners, see what I can learn. But I want you to stop your investigation. If this spreads without proof, it will cause panic we can't contain." Hebert agreed, though the word tasted bitter. The inquiries went nowhere. Plantation owners closed ranks immediately. Questions were treated as insults, suggestions as threats. Etienne Broussard was openly hostile, furious at the implication that he lacked control over his property. Others were more polite but no less defensive. The explanation was always the same: anomalies, distant ancestry, coincidence. Within 2 weeks, Thibault sent word: insufficient evidence. The matter was closed, but the births did not stop. By the end of 1841, there were 9 children: Sweetwater, Riverside again, Oakmont again, Cypress Point, different mothers, same features, same timing, and always, Dr. Marcus Levine in the background, arriving months before, departing quietly after. The enslaved women noticed before anyone else. They began refusing assignments to the main houses, claimed illness, injury, any excuse that would keep them in the fields, even knowing punishment would follow. Whippings increased. Resistance hardened. Productivity slipped. Tools broke. Work slowed. Small, quiet acts of defiance accumulated like pressure beneath the ground. The plantation owners blamed the overseers. The overseers blamed the enslaved. Only Hebert understood the truth. And finally, he broke his silence. He shared his records, carefully at first, then more openly, with other overseers, with traders, with men who traveled and talked. Copies of his maps, his timelines, his notes. He knew he was risking everything, but the pattern had become undeniable. By the summer of 1842, the story was known across 3 parishes, and then it reached Dr. Marcus Levine. His response stunned everyone. He did not deny it, did not flee, did not hide. Instead, he sent invitations, formal ones. A meeting, he wrote, to address certain questions directly and honestly. Plantation owners, Judge Thibault, several prominent citizens, and Vincent Hebert. The gathering took place on September 15, 1842, in Levine's home on the outskirts of the parish seat. The air was heavy, rain threatening but never breaking. 15 men arrived, uneasy, curious, angry. Levine greeted each personally, calm, impeccable, his pale hair neatly combed, his blue eyes steady. He offered drinks. Cigar smoke curled through the parlor like a mocking comfort. When everyone was seated, Levine stood. "Yes," he said evenly, "I am the father of these children, all of them." The room erupted, shouting, accusations, rage. Judge Thibault struggled to restore order. Broussard's face flushed purple. Duchamp looked close to collapse. Levine waited, sipped his brandy, then he explained. He called it an experiment, a study in heredity, in racial dominance, in whether European traits could be reliably imposed through selective breeding. He spoke of the women as resources, of the children as data, of himself as a scientist constrained only by curiosity. "Rape is a crime against persons," he said calmly. "These women are not persons under the law. I have violated nothing." The logic was monstrous and legally sound. Thibault demanded he leave the parish. The owners agreed, not out of justice but fear of scandal. Levine accepted without resistance. His work, he said, was complete. He would move west. Texas offered opportunities. Within weeks, he was gone. 13 children remained. They grew up marked by their faces, by the silence around their origins, by the knowledge that something about them caused pain. Some were sold. Some were kept as house servants. Some disappeared into records that stopped caring. Their mothers carried the weight forever. Hebert resigned 3 years later. He moved to New Orleans, took his journals with him. In 1867, after the war had burned slavery out of the law but not the memory, he donated them to a historical society. He wrote a final entry, that sometimes the greatest crimes are those perfectly legal, that the horror was not only what one man did, but the system that made it possible and protected him. The journals were filed away, rarely read, but the children lived on. And so did the truth, quiet, buried, waiting for someone to look into the ledger and finally understand what those columns meant.